Hello, everybody. Welcome to Founders Ascent. Today we have a special guest named Bruce, and he is the founder of Pariveda. Bruce, give us a brief explanation about yourself.
Well, good to meet you, Gavin, and thank you for having me on your podcast.
Yeah, of course.
It's where to begin. I'm going to begin at the ending, kind of ending. So I founded Pariveda Solutions 20 years ago, and earlier this year in March, after much convincing of our board of directors, I was like, it'll be 20 years, and it'd be really smart for me to step down as CEO, and we've got all these good candidates inside Pariveda that can replace me, and so they agreed to that, and I'm no longer CEO. I just carry the title of founder, and I'm mostly an individual contributor. Special projects go do what needs to be done per the CEO. Still a director, still the largest shareholder outside of our ESOP, which maybe gets into a different discussion. So 20 years ago, I started the company. I didn't plan to start this company. I was planning to go back to school and get a doctorate in information technology from the University of North Texas, where I had a long, multi-decade relationship with the chair, and he was like, "Hey, I'm more than happy to be your principal investigator." And I was going to go teach school. But when I shared that with the people I was working with at the time, they were like, "Don't do that. We want you to start a company so we can come work with you." And I was like, I'm kind of tired of doing that, but okay, duty calls. And so I started. I started this company. Like I said, back in 2003. And before that, kind of had about 20 years of a variety of experiences, mostly in consulting, information technology consulting, some management consulting, different companies of different sizes, from behemoths to near startups. And had started my own company at one point, merged it with another that got bought by another, which was the point where, okay, I'm done with this, and I'm ready to move on. So that kind of ties it to all my work career together. And if I went back a little bit further, which might be of interest to folks, people earlier in their careers, I went to Baylor University as an undergrad because that was the best financial deal I had available, and I needed a financial deal to make it to college. It was just not that. Didn't come from a background where that was, not challenging. And so it was largely self-financed my way through college, but mostly with scholarships. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. My mom was a scientist. My dad was an engineer. I am kind of a scientist, but I thought that was too nerdy for me. I was such a nerd already. I would just become, hopelessly nerdy and not nearly smart enough to be a scientist, which I think okay on both those things after a bunch of decades. It's like, well, you're not that nerdy, and you'd be an okay scientist, but too late, right?
Yeah.
And so I went to undergrad not really knowing what I'd do, and fortunately I was in a group where I had a lot of exposure to some recent grads who were going to grad school and class people, and they were like, quickly they just said, well, you should get a degree from the business school. You ought to get economics and add on finance, because there's a lot more lucrative jobs. And so I said, okay, I trust these people. They're they know me, they know the school, and all of that, and so I did that. And as I was going along, I thought, okay, well, I'm going to be a banker. I was thinking about becoming a banker, and that meant at the time, and it may still be true, if you were going to be a banker, you had to have an MBA. And then with that MBA, if you got an offer, you would be a credit analyst, probably a junior credit analyst. And you do that for a few years. And eventually you could become a loan officer, all that sort of stuff. They're kind of the career track. So I didn't even interview. I didn't interview for a single job as an undergraduate. I just applied to two grad schools, University of Texas, because it was cheap and I could already saved enough money to pay for that, which was it's a really good school. Yeah. And then the other one was University of Chicago, which I guess now is even more elite than it was back then. And that was very expensive. I had virtually not enough money to do that. So that was just, okay, sign up for student debt. But all through that, I was planning on being a banker. So I was going to get a banking job. And if I was successful, my thinking was I would move to a rural part of Texas, open a bank, and that would be my life, live, have a family, be, an important contributing citizen in a relatively small, semi-rural part of Texas, maybe a city or town of under 1,000 or something like that. And along the way, of course, I fell in love with a woman now 42 years ago. We've been married for more than that, because we've been married for 42 years. And she wanted to be in Texas. And so when I was in grad school, I was looking for jobs in Texas, which at University of Chicago, there are not many companies that come to that school with jobs in Texas. But one was what's now called Accenture. It wasn't called Accenture back then. And they were pretty adamant that I should interview with them. And so I took them up on the offer and, decided I'd go into information technology consulting, not knowing virtually nothing about computer. It was 1983. The IBM PC was the man of the year, the person of the year in 1981 on Time magazine. It was a time of growth and excitement in the industry. And so that's what I did. And, now it all ties in, but that's
really cool. What was it like starting your company about like 20 years ago? Like what made you go off and do your own thing?
Well, it was really I think about it like being called, because like I said, I was not leaning that way, but there were so many people that said, we really need you to start a company and for us, because no one likes working here, or at least none of them did, right? It's a big company. There's plenty of people that probably like working there, but not this group of like 10 to 15 people. And I just felt like I was being called, to start it. Now, I mean, it was my second or third company, depending on how you think about it. Pariveda is my second or third company, but that was the gestation, of that. So hopefully, that helps.
And do you think that's true for like basically any sort of startup or entrepreneurial venture, that it's really important that you have a group of people with you to help keep you on track? Or do you think sort of there's something to be said for doing it solo?
I think, well, that was, there's no clear-cut answer, but I can expand on that. So for example, a lot of times one will start with a small group. There's 2 or 3 people like, safety in numbers. And so you might have a couple people. Probably most ventures start out with one person. So for example, when I started my first company, I was just one person. And it's a bit of dry humor, but when people ask me about how did you start that one, I would say, well, I was called to that too, but it's different. So that one, I was in a consulting company, and I'd consulted in various capacities over time, for different companies and different senior leaders. And I had done a brief stint in industry where I worked for 3 different CIOs, and those CIOs had all gone to, other companies from where the 4 of us had been together. And I'd work for each of them, and they would keep calling me. These 3 CIOs were chief information officers. I got to think, there's all kinds of I's, but chief information officers. They would call me, and each one wanted me to come work for them, as a salaried employee. And I'm like, I'm not gonna do that. I have to move. my wife's an attorney in Texas. She's not licensed in other states, and she's working full time and all that kind of stuff. So eventually they were like, okay, we'll come consult. Right. So I was like, okay, and so it's a whole different kind of being called. But that's a great way to start a business when your future customers are calling you and saying, I want to give you work. Versus starting Pariveda in a really tough time, the bottom of what was called the tech wreck, the 2001, 2003 recession in technology and high tech, and 2003 was fortunately the bottom, and just people were fed up, and they wanted to leave. They wanted to escape across the Red Sea and get into the Sinai desert. Just get away. And so it's going into a desert. It's pretty tough. So we had a one-page website, which basically said, here are our 5 core values. And then it was talk, we'd go try to get meetings with people that we knew, and we'd say, hey, here's our one-page website, and you know us and you trust us, and please, is there even this tiniest little thing that we can do for you? And like one story was a CEO of a company said, well, I can give you a $20,000 project, but I can't promise you anything after that, right? There's nothing. There's just this $20,000 project. And we was, oh, thank you. It's like, don't worry, right? We love it. Thank you so much. And it was off to the races, off to the races.
And for those 4 CIOs that wanted you before you had even thought about starting a company, what do you think made you so valuable to them? Do you have any idea what sort of
well, in the case of even in that case, one of us had done work for them before. So it's almost always there's a prior relationship where they knew us and we had done work for them while working for another company, and now we were on our own, and they would and so and I'll just trust that they'll get a good team around them. As soon as the projects get big enough, like if it's 1 or 2 people, they're not going to worry about, I just need maybe that one person that I know. But once the projects get bigger, even 3 or 4 people, then they want to know that you've got a team around you. But at this point, they're just saying, well, I'll trust you on this next project, that you can bring a team that's going to do good work. And then if you do, then you're kind of set. As long as you're doing excellent work. I will say the first time when I set up the company, the first time, and these 3 CIOs were competing to get me to consult for them. I did have a conversation with one of them because I said, and now here's my rate. And so, well, that's just outrageously high. And I was like, okay, well, yeah, it's high, but it's cheap. And I said, look, it's like, you're asking me to do this kind of consulting. And I've worked at this company, and I would have been billed out at 3 times what I'm charging. And they just said, you're right, this is a good deal. And, anyway, and of course, once you do it with one, then it was the same for the other 2. Of course, they all talk, right? They all talk to each other anyway. Or those 3 did. So it kind of depends, yeah.
Yeah, and it doesn't. You mentioned how you wanted to become a banker, and that you really didn't know back then that this was where you were going to end up at all. Do you think that? If I just known then that I could have been so much further in my career, or do you think those experiences and trying out all those different things gave you this unique skill set where you were uniquely qualified to help all these different people?
Yeah, the short answer is no. most of learning is on the job, not really what you can learn in school, or books. Those things are very valuable. I appreciate that 6 years of work, in universities, and I appreciate there was no kindergarten in Texas at the time. But I appreciate first grade through 12th grade as well. There's a lot of learning there, but most of what you really learn from a business perspective is going to be on the job, 70% of it, and so it's largely off one's experiences. But typically when one's hiring someone early, they're looking at their 6 years or 5 or 4 of the doctoral candidate is probably going to go teach, usually going to go teach college back then anyway. Yeah. So you're talking about undergrads and masters of science or arts or masters of business administration, and they're looking at your concentrations and your focus. And so a bank's going to look for mostly finance, and they're okay with some economics, but they don't generally care about the economics. They care about the finance. And I can't tell you how relevant that training is to what you actually do. Never having had that experience, but understanding what a credit analyst does, I would say, okay, there's a pretty good alignment. But the reason that they start people as credit analysts is they have so much to learn on the job, right? For a few years, because none of that was taught, or very little of that was taught in school. So here I am. I'm mostly an economist with a lot of finance, and I'm going into information technology with, across 6 years of college, 9 hours and 3 courses of information technology classes. So how did that work out? Accenture, again, that's a modern name. I joined them 2 names back, provided a huge amount of training that everybody had to go, whether you were a computer science major or marketing major, whoever they hired, right? You had to go through a lot of training, and that helped a lot. But it was really, again, it turned out to be really most of the learning was on the job when you're on a project, and so most of that never made a difference. There was now I'll give you the anodyne for it, the opposite for it. When I was in management consulting, there was a project that is at a huge company, one of the largest companies in the world, and we were selecting financial software for them, very, very, at the very, very highest levels of the organization. And the number 2 person in the, kind of call it the steering committee, the sponsors. So the number 2 person, this is the most amazing thing, kept insisting on having a graduate from the University of Chicago, because that's where he had graduated from. So they kept pressing the company I was working for to have that. And so that's how I got assigned to that project. So that's time in 40 years that it made a difference in a very, very real way. And it was fascinating because that it created, I wouldn't say it created instantaneous trust, but it was like someone who didn't trust anybody because there wasn't alumni from the same place he did. Then I show up and he just immediately trusted me. I thought that was kind of strange. But it's just very interesting. And it speaks to, wow, there's a lot of stuff in life that's like that. When you think about how, tribes, right? And so you can think about even a business school as being a tribe, right? Or a campus as like tribal.
My dad,
very old school.
My dad says that a lot about like going to A&M and stuff because the network's so big.
Yes, it's huge. It's not. It's unique. It's special, and it was a special place. There's no question about it.
Yeah.
Muster.
So
I mean, all. Yeah.
talk us through real quick, like what your like role as founder and CEO looked like in the beginning, and sort of like how it changed and developed. Because you were CEO for like almost 20 years, right? So like, how did that change as you expanded? Like, how many people did you start employing? Like, what did that look like as it developed?
Right. Good question, Gavin. So we started with two of us with a plan of as we got work. So $20,000 enough, right? But after that, right, we started getting enough work we could start bringing on other people. So initially, with two people, everybody's doing virtually everything. And then you move from that, which is two people makes a team, but then you're moving to what I call a small team, which can be theoretically up to 15 people, but ideally it's kind of like 7 to 9 people. So you're a team leader at that point. What's different is if you're a company, you're running the company too. So I might be on a project all during the regular day, and oftentimes it's happening, billable, doing work for clients throughout the day, and then at 5 o'clock, switch hats, put on my CEO hat, and run the books, right? And every 2 weeks, run the payroll and all that sort of stuff until we got larger and we could afford to say, okay, we're going to pay someone to do those kinds of things. So now, we're over 600. So as a CEO of a 600 person company, I wasn't doing any of that anymore. And it was very fun at the beginning because oftentimes I would be the one with the most relevant experience, right? So I had to be the backbone of a project team. And I would tell someone who reported to me, I would say, okay, you are going to be the in charge person of this project, and you are going to be the principal person who works with the client, even if it was my relationship where I knew the client. And I'm going to be basically your staff person, right? I'm going to be your worker bee, and you get me from basically 8 to 5. Right? And then after that, right, I turn into a pumpkin and have to do my CEO stuff. Anyway, and I enjoyed that thoroughly. And I think they did too after they got over the shock of it.
And how do you determine, you've obviously demonstrated you're really capable of learning a whole ton of different things in different industries. You went into IT with basically no experience and managed to build this massive company out of it. How do you determine what stuff you do yourself and learn how to do yourself, and what stuff you delegate out and say, okay, that's not me?
Right. Good question, BJ. I mean, and there's different contexts, right? There's a context of as a project leader, could be a manager or someone even more senior in consulting parlance. Same thing in industry, a manager, director, VP, depending on the size of the project might have. And so the higher you are up in like the project team hierarchy, you're going to be doing a lot of delegation, but you're even as a manager, you're going to be doing a lot of delegation of work on the project. And I think that's pretty straightforward, and people, get that. And if they don't, they're not going to succeed as a project manager. The project's just not going to work very well. So when we're talking about the enterprise, it's more complex. It's not as focused. It's not as time bound. And there's that much more variety, right? There's so many things to prioritize and decide what's going to get done and not get done and all that. So it comes down to, and initially there's no one else to do it, right? So you're doing it. And what you have to be doing is you have to be looking at several things. One is what is the priority, if you will, of tasks or functions that need to be offloaded so that we can scale the business, right? And focus on, like for me, focus on a more narrow set as things get more complex as well. You can't be all things to everybody. And so what's the priority? And there are different factors in that. So one would be, well, how alien is that, right? How far, how non-adjacent is that function's skill, and what it needs, what they need to do and know to one's own experience or what one's capable of. So for example, I was in effect a CFO for quite a while because I had all this finance training, right? So it actually helped in that regard. Whereas a different entrepreneur might have said, well, that's the very first thing, that I'm going to give up. But maybe I'm not going to, maybe they wouldn't give up, say, marketing. And to me, I was like, no, that's the first one I'm going to give up, right? Because I don't have marketing experience, even though I like marketing. I mean, I enjoy it. Then which leads to kind of the other factor. It's like, well, you might be really good or not good at something, but your passion for it is also there. So, your motivation, what's going to drive you to keep in something. So someone could be really good. Someone could be really good as, hey, you could be a CFO, but if you don't like it, if it's boring as heck, you should go get somebody else, someone else to do that. And you could get into other factors like needs or risks. You could start. So that's at the individual level. Like, what is the lead going to take? And then there's other things like, well, what is the risk? What is the risk, the external risk or the internal risk that's present? And the bigger the risk, then the more, that's a reason to pass something off to somebody else, right? We need to get someone in here who's very capable, because we have growing risk here, which is not necessarily a bad thing, right? A lot of risk comes with beginning bigger, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's multiple factors. Those are probably the principal ones to think about. One of the secrets of Pariveda success, because we made it, and we are in the 99th percentile of professional services firms in the world. And that sounds so ostentatious, but when you think about it, okay, that puts us in the knee of the curve, right? Because you could go up into the tens of billions, and we're not even remotely close to that. But it's a huge fat tail of small firms, right? And we're in the 99th percentile. There's only less than 1%, maybe 0.5% of the firms in the world are bigger than us, but they're ginormous, right? And all that sort of stuff. So when we started the company, it was very important to me that we architect it to scale, because scale or size is an important risk mitigator. At a certain size, of which we're not, we're probably halfway there, things are just less risky. And then if we could double again from that, things are even less risky. Now, there's probably some advantage after that, after two doublings from where we are today. I mean, certainly the biggest companies in our industry would say that, and it's probably true. But we could take out almost all the risk, individual company risk, if we were basically, doubled of where we are today. So, and then there's certain things that come with that. It's like, well, if you're planning to scale, then you have to do things differently. You have to make different investments, because most professional services firms in our space are what people call lifestyle companies, which is not really, it's kind of a disdainful, pejorative term to use, which is not really, it's not fair to the person that founded that company. But a lot of companies are of just a few people, or it's a small team, and they're like that for their entire life of their firm. That's called a lifestyle firm. And that doesn't mean, oh, that person was lazy, or they were just milking off their firm and all that sort of stuff and never wanted to grow. Very few people are like that. There are people like that, There's all kinds of people in the world. There are people like that everywhere. But that's not typically what. So that's, there's a lot of companies like that. But then there's companies that say, well, I want to sell my company someday, as opposed to be stuck with it, until sometimes I pass away, right? Or I'm really, really old, and it's funded my retirement and all that kind of thing, and it just kind of goes away, or I just keep doing it until I'm in my 70s or 80s. There's a lot of examples like that, where they say, hey, at some point in my 50s or my 60s, I want to sell this company and live the life of Riley. And I'm like, okay, that sounds like a lifestyle company, if that's what you're thinking. But so that's scaling like a boutique, and you can do that in 10 to 15 years. You can do it in less. Thinking about it, if you think about it, and all of that sort of stuff. Well, we were different, right? When I started this, one of my conditions, because if you want me to start this company, some things are going to be different, and one of those was, hey, we're going to scale, right? And so in 10 years, we were in the 99th percentile versus being in the whatever, the 25th percentile or 30th percentile, like most of those other companies. And there's trade-offs for all that. It's not. I'm not advocating to say we did a panacea or we did perfectly. This is different. It's a different set of values and a different set of choices and a different set of trade-offs.
And when it comes to scaling a company, maybe you can get this down to like one word or one idea. But what do you think is like the most important thing when scaling a company, from like one where you are talking with everyone and communicating with everyone, to one like you have now, where I'm sure you don't know all 600 people personally, right? And so,
right. Yeah, I don't. It's kind of embarrassing. I mean, I wish I did, but it's really hard. But probably 300,
Yeah.
And then I can probably do another 150, and then it's like, then I don't know, right? And they'll know me oftentimes. They'll say, well, remember the time we talked 2 years ago? Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm embarrassed. I don't remember. But at least turns out it was a good conversation, right? They're recalling a good conversation. So all that's going to go on the air, true confessions, right? The authentic truth of it all. The science says that's very hard to know more than 250 people, right? And it's really about 150 or so where all that starts to break down. There's good on that. But which is interesting. So that's actually a rule for scaling, right? Is you have to think about, you need to chunk things in chunks of no more than 150 people. So to have some growing room around that, you say chunk things in groups of 100 people. That's not quite I think what you're asking, but that's there as, hey, all that rule number 3, right? I'll give you 3 rules. So rule number 1 is it's all about the small team. Remember we talking about that earlier. So if you think about it, the C-suite, the executive suite, the CEO and their immediate reports, that ideally is a small team. So that small team, and that ideally in any company could be pick a huge company that people know about. Apple, right? I don't know how Apple's organized. They probably have a bigger team. They probably have a larger than small team, kind of C-suite team. But generally, optimally, one person should be the leader of a small team. So that can be 2 to 15 people. The sweet spot is 7 to 9 people. So if you have fewer than, and this is again science, right, of studies, the science says is that, okay, while 5 people is a small team and 6 people is a small team, people actually feel better about their team if there's a 7th person is added. And they feel really good with number 8 and feel really good with number 9. But in the survey literature, it's like, you add that 10th person, it's good, but it's not as good anymore. So and again, that relates to the same thing about overall how many people can you can you really know and trust and all that sort of stuff, the 150, 250 number. So that's key, right? You will manage through a small team. And that's like, what's the thing? It says, okay, now you need those leaders that are reporting to you as your team members, right, that you're in charge of. You need them to do the same. So they need to have no more than a small team. Okay, and so on and so forth. So at 3 layers, do the math. Let's say 9. Let's just take the high end of optimum 9, times, and then 9 people 9 times. So 81, and then again 9. You're under 1,000 people. Obviously, there are companies that are larger than that. There's things to do, but that is a key bit of scaling because it minimizes the complex communications and connection that people have to maintain to be cohesive. It goes up as you add people to a team. The number of connections goes up geometrically, and so it can get hopelessly, complex. So by doing the constructing it to be small teams of small teams of small teams, you minimize the friction between people, and you minimize, if you will, the chain of the information flow, right? It's three levels, right? So it's like, that's not too far. It's not like, we're making 10 hops to get from A to B. So things can be communicated clearly and quickly, and that, and then obviously, right, I think I've just, again, make the cautionary note that yes, in bigger organizations, you have to do more and more things. So that's rule number 2. And some people might say, well, that sounds like rule number 1. And I'm like, well, it could be, but here's, and these are things that I've at Pariveda for 20 years. I talked about them before Pariveda. That's probably why people came and said, we need you to start a company, right? So we can come work with you. Rule number 1 for me is you must develop your successor. And then it's okay. And you can't just develop one person. You have to develop 2. People come and go, all kinds of things. I mean, stuff comes up. If you're amazing, you might be able to develop 3, and you had all the time in the world. So, okay, that can happen. But generally speaking, at any time, you should be developing 2 people to be your successor. So it just follows that if it's essential that someone develop 2 people to succeed them, then the people that are going to, like, say, succeed me, right, or have, what do they need to learn to do to be an effective, besides rule number 3 and rule number 2? They need to develop 2 successors to really scale, so on and so on and so forth. So those are my 3 basic rules. It's like, if you can do that, you'll be all right. You're going to do just fine, right? No, and I think that certainly applies in professional services. I think it applies in all enterprises, not for profit, consumer products, good company. I think it applies everywhere. It's a hard argument to make with people who are kind of stuck in their thinking in other industries. And I'm just not articulate enough to convince them yet, or have the compelling argument. Makes everybody say, "Oh, Bruce, you're right on those 3 things."
One of the things Gavin and I and a handful of friends are doing is we have an idea for a company that we all want to start together, but I'm sort of the main programmer, and then Gavin knows a little, and a few other people know a little, but I think we need more technical help. And it seems like with you, your big thing is, what's most important is these small teams, these small groups of people. How do you make sure you get those really, really awesome people for those small teams? Because like I have 4 or 5 people in mind, but I look at those really, and they have awesome internships with like JP Morgan and State Farm. And I'm like, how can I possibly convince them to come work on this random idea I have? And so how is it that you've managed to attract 600 really amazing people to keep your company functioning super well?
Well, at that size, it's not about me. I mean, it's the whole company and the culture. So in the ideal, building on those rules, and particularly think about rule number 1. So if you need to be developing 2 people to be your successor, and isn't it fabulous if you actually had 2? Because wow, you could scale up the business more. It's like if you need to know what that person needs to be your successor. Now, if you're starting out a new company early in one's career, it's like, well, I don't know, I got to figure this out myself. I hope I grow and all that. It's, yes, but you have some idea. And so in the ideal, you would only hire people that you thought could be your successors. And then, you would be urging. So when those folks needed to start hiring people, as you expanded all that, you would say, hey, we all need to be thinking about hiring people who would be capable of being our successor. Now, it's a theoretical ideal, but if you don't have to get it right too often to have more talent than virtually any other company in the world, because that's not best practice.
I feel like that takes a lot of humility from everyone in the company to say, this new person that I'm just hiring, he could be better than me one day.
Exactly. Yes.
And so that's sort of an essential part of your culture, is having that humility and getting ego out of the way so you can just solve the problems and get the best people.
Well, I mean, we hope. It doesn't, it's not that easy. That's certainly a hope. I mean, some of the mantra, there's a classic, verse it's used in all 3 Western traditions, right? Blessed are, for they shall inherit the earth, which is not timid, it's humble, right? So if you want to scale, it helps to be humble, because otherwise you're not going to inherit the earth, right? I mean, and then, of course, in Eastern religious traditions, there's always there, right? That is just a universal truth. And so that's a basic thing. One of the things, some of the things that I'll when I'm in front of our introductory classes, we're bringing folks on board. A lot of them are coming straight out of college, and I get to spend some time with them, which is, precious for me. I try to share a couple of things with them about that. Like, one is the name Pariveda, or Pariveda, right? If we're going to get it correct in Sanskrit. There are a couple of interpretations of that. One is more secular than the other, right? But the more secular one, which is the one we use on our website, is gaining the benefits of complete knowledge. Okay, well, that's not really what the Hindu scholars and theologians, that's not the deep meaning of why they invented the word and why they use it. It's much more, you can never achieve complete knowledge. You can just approach it. It's like a life journey. All right, so now you think about, what would you put on your website? Well, you wouldn't put the latter one on about, you can never get there, because the competitors would say, well, look, why would you hire those guys, right? They already say on their website, they don't know it. That's an aspect of humility. It's extremely powerful to be courageous and curious, right? That one's going to explore and willing to fail and learn. Right? That's all along that line. And then the other little bit that I throw out, and I honestly can't say how successful that's been in Pariveda, it works in special forces. There's a phrase that's used in special forces. And so you think about a small group of people, very small, and they're off on their own, and it's very dangerous, right? And they're highly trained, and they're super confident and all that kind of stuff. And so one of their mantras is, arrogant leads to, you can get lazy. I'm so good, I can ease back. leads to careless. We don't need to post a perimeter guard tonight. Dead. Arrogant, lazy, careless, dead, right? In terms of like, are our projects going to succeed or not? So we're not worried about life or death stuff, but our project's going to succeed or not? I think I know everything. I think I know all the answers. Arrogant. So because I know everything, I'm not going to listen to people. I'm not going to poke on things like, why is that? Why is it like that? And all that. Tell me more. I'm going to get sloppy, careless, and I'm going to screw up a project, and it's going to fail, and that's going to be terrible for the customer, and we may never get to work there again. And it may be so bad that everybody in town knows about it, right? And they don't want to hire us. Dead. Right? Anyway. It's a little dark humor. It's very dry. It doesn't go over very well. So it'd be interesting to hear from the podcast. All right, that's chill, or you need to just stop ever saying that, Bruce.
Yeah, so I want to ask you about what it was like, what it still is like being a leader, and things that you've learned along the way that have helped you at the helm of the company.
Wow. Well, there's a lot of lessons learned from a lot of failures, but that's probably not it. I would say staying humble is important and often not understood. It's most people appreciate it, but a lot of times it's not understood. It's like that's just weird, and it doesn't feel right. Do I really want to be led by a humble person? And like, well, I hope you figure it out someday. It's a choice thing. There's that aspect of it. There's so many things. There's for some leaders, like when I was talking earlier, like I was afraid I was a nerd, and I could become even nerdier, and so just like completely, whatever, disassociated from humanity or some crazy fear like that. And I think if you may not be able to tell it, but when you listen to this recording, you say, oh, he's a nerd, right? He's throwing out all these studies and statistics and things like that. That's pretty nerdy. And so one has to manage that, because you have to communicate as a leader, and the larger the team or the audience, we could say really the audience that you're trying to address, you're trying to convince, to take an action, then you've got a greater diversity of perspectives that people come from, which is very powerful. Diversity is extremely powerful. And at the same time, it means you have to think about communicating to many people at many levels in many different ways at the same time, and that's quite challenging. And you're going to. For me, it's like, do I need to hit the top 20% on this, or do I need to go to the bottom 20%? And then of course I've got to cover. You have to cover the middle. Regardless, and what's top and what's bottom and what's middle depends on the context of the subject and the audience and all that sort of stuff. So I would say I have not perfected that. Right, that is an ongoing area of learning for me, even though I'm past retirement age. Right? Barely, it's still there's still learning for me to do there. And believe me, I get feedback about that. Another thing for me, I have some hot buttons. One of which is I'm for underdogs. A lot of that's just feeling like I've been an underdog all my life. And so I root for underdogs. I care about underdogs, no matter, shape, size, color, beliefs, whatever. I'm into the underdog, and that creates tension. for people that aren't underdogs. And, every once in a while, in my career, I've gotten in some pretty serious trouble for that from time to time. So, but the list is long of things like that.
Gotcha. So like, if you were to say, like, give one piece of advice for like a CEO that's just starting, like what would it be? Maybe it has to do with leadership. Maybe it has to do with finding other people to join the team. Like, what would it be? Or maybe it could be like a trait that they have to embody.
Yeah, and maybe so this might be some kind of amalgam. So I would say, the first thing, particularly that people earlier in their career want to follow, is they want to follow someone who knows what they're doing. So that generally means the functional or technical, however you want to think about it, skills, expertise to do the job. Now, if you were going to start out with a much older group, it could be, that would probably be less important. But I think about most young companies are led by young people who are generally working with even younger people. And so that leads to some things. It's like, okay, so when you're picking your business that you're going to do, it should be something that you feel like you really know and that you enjoy learning about. And sometimes people may not be aligned on that. As a person, and maybe I think this is a great idea, and I'm going to go figure it out. And that's okay, but you got to think about that. That's a polarity to manage, right? If I don't know this cold, I'm going to have to learn it. Then I need to think about as I ramp up. The first thing is I need to be credible as knowing my stuff. That's table stakes. The other things like, am I a good leader? Do I listen? Am I a good listener to people, my customers and my employees? That's super important. And then you get into the 3 rules I was talking about, because it's like if you're good at that stuff, and you can hire people who are good at other things, they will want to come work with you and for you, and they'll give you everything they have and that sort of stuff. Oh, you don't know finance? That's my shtick. I like you. I think I can learn a lot and all this stuff from you, and I think you'll do a good job running the company. I will come in. You don't have to worry about finance ever again. Oh, you don't feel like you know marketing? I know that cold, right? So, and I'm interested in this, kind of startup young thing, right? Exciting. All that sort of stuff. But that's about the people that you're bringing onto the team and not yourself. Another bit that I hadn't mentioned before is that I think to be a good leader, even of a small team, you have to be able to follow fast, because there's a lot of times where you're leading, and that's great, and you have to watch getting too far ahead. There's the African proverb that's often cited. See it pretty regularly, which is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to arrive, go together. And so you might be out on point on something, but if you're, and your team might be going another direction. And so you got to kind of know where that team's going. And it's not always about, hey, team, you need to turn. It's like, let me listen to that. Where are they going? And that might be a perfectly equally good option. There's always multiple choices, right? There's not one right answer, one wrong answer. There's usually a big space of any of these things will work. They're all directionally correct. And we don't know which one's better than another one. And so you got to be a fast follower. And then lastly on that thing, you have to be, and then you have to be patient with eventually they will see it my way. And in the meantime, it's okay if we don't do it exactly my way.
Yeah, and something else I'm seeing on your profile is you're a business mentor at RevTech Ventures, and it looks like you were on a bunch of different boards over the course of your life.
Yeah.
Walk us through what some of those experiences were like.
Well, most of those are advisory.
Yeah.
So, like RevTech and Electric 54 is another one where I'm an advisory board, and essentially some of my not-for-profits. All my not-for-profit boards, I'm advisory. I'm not fiduciary. Yeah. I am on fiduciary boards. But the advisory role, like how do I get on those the two business ones? It's really by giving good advice to people, right? Where it's like, oh, I know Bruce maybe, he did a project for me and all that sort of stuff. There's some of that, but then there's because of that, I got a friend in business and they got a problem, and would you talk to them, right? 30 minutes, an hour, and help them with their problem. And I was, yes, absolutely. I mean, I did do those this week. Yeah. I did two yesterday. I'm trying to think if did I do one earlier in the week. I think I might have done 3. And so that's how you wind up on advisory boards, because it's like, Bruce has good advice, and at least I want to hear it, right? Maybe sometimes it's not good. Maybe it's just different. Maybe it's just I need to hear different advice. I want an alternative view. I may not do it, but I want to get the benefit of that. And usually someone's recommended. Yeah, usually when someone said you ought to talk to. Yeah. So that nutshell. Yeah.
When you're advising these boards or even your own company, when it comes to like setting goals and expectations, do you think it's better to set sort of maybe slightly below what you're capable of, but guarantee 100% every single time and be consistent? Or do you think you set something that you're probably not going to achieve, but maybe you'll push further than you're actually capable of because you have that big sort of audacious goal?
Yeah.
Do you think it's...
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if we think about forecasting, you would want to have both, right? You'd want to have a range. So if we thought about something like how much revenue are we shooting for in this year, and so you could have the survival number, which when you're starting out, or might be 0. Yeah, it's like, no, we've saved enough money. The zeros are survival. We can't do 0 for 2 years. We might not be able to do 0 for a year, but maybe for 6 months we could do 0. And then there's like, wow, if we hit it out of the park, if we just everything went right, we nailed it the way we think we could nail it. It could be this good, but what do we reasonably expect? So in terms of like thinking about a forecast, it's important to have multiple numbers, or you could just say, what do we expect? And then have some, deviation off those. It's not quite the same, but pretty similar. But there's like from a company vision perspective, I think it's important to be aspirational. This is our purpose, and this is ultimately the impact that we can make on the world from that. So that's going to be, it's almost always it's going to be very aspirational, and it's not going to be something, oh yeah, we're clearly not going to do that anytime soon. I mean, Pariveda is 20 years. We have aspirational stuff that we're all like, yeah, that ain't going to happen anytime soon. But it's, over time, and it may take a couple of more decades, we could get there. So we have things like that. But it's hard to shoot for those, every day in the grind. You don't sit there and say, okay, 20 years from now, we want to be recognized like this. You bring it back in time chunks to more recent stuff and says, well, if we need to wind up there, what do we need to do now, right? And what we need to do now is what we need to do. So you can work back in time, right? So if 20 years from now, you want to be, let's say you're starting out, and you said in 20 years from now, we want to be a $500 million company, which would be very audacious, right? Extremely audacious in revenue. Then you would say, okay, we're probably not going to be growing 30% into 500. I mean, we could, it happens, into $500 million, but maybe we're growing 10%. So that's pretty stout, right? So, okay, that means in the year 19, we have to be 450 million. I mean, you could work it back, and then you start to sit there and say, well, okay, I've got to do a lot of stuff, to get to that. And anyway, there's various ways of thinking about it. Hopefully that helps.
Interesting. One of the things I kind of want to ask you about is, so BJ and I read this book by Simon Sinek. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he talked about, it's called Start With Why. And it was talking about making sure that everybody on your team, and not only that, the people that you're doing business with, the consumer and other clients, that they understand like why you're doing what you're doing. Is there anything that you were doing as CEO, as leader, to ensure that people within the company and even outside of the company, so it's like they could understand why you were doing what you're doing, to uh, help make sure everybody was on board and was on the same page to be more productive in the end?
Yes, and with good success, not perfect, but good success to get to the 90th percentile. Yeah, I mean, there are a number of things. The one that's probably the most straightforward is think about it in terms of professional services industry. Most business, there's some business writing about professional services. Most of it's manufacturing, consumer packaged goods, and of course, I mean, everything under the sun. Not so much in professional services because they're not, most of those firms aren't very large. How else do you get to the 99th percentile fast?
Yeah.
Right? It's like a bunch of small firms. But I think about, this is Bruce's framework, but so I think in professional services, there are three financial drivers to success. One is revenue, growing your revenue. And so you if you're thinking about your business model as a professional services firm, and there's all kinds of people probably listening to this with different ideas, but these generally work for other industries too. Is you would be say, well, if I need to grow revenue, then that implies a certain business model. It implies a certain way that I'm going to, who my customers will be, who my partners will be, the kinds of people I'm going to hire, and how I'm going to put them, how I'm going to integrate all that to deliver value to my customers. So that's like one, and that is I'd say that is the classic high, large firms. So we have in the top 5% of firms in professional services. That's basically the dominant financial driver, kind of the way the business model is built and constructed. And so a lot of people follow that. So, well, if I want to really scale up to be a multi-billion-dollar company, clearly here's the way. It's like, well, there are other things. So at the other side of it, that was revenue. So you work down through the income statement, and you can pick something, but the easiest one to pick is gross margin. You could pick EBITDA, but I just use gross margin. And okay, so if you want to maximize gross margin in professional services, it means that you need to create a lot of intellectual capital and charge for that, because otherwise you're scaling by adding labor costs, and the margins are not even close. And so that leads to, it's the best of the best, right? Those are going to be boutique firms. They're going to be a fraction of the size. But they can be extremely profitable, and they can be sold. So a lifestyle company can be extremely profitable, like take out millions of dollars per year. You can grow them into a little powerhouse that lots of big companies want to buy you, right? So, which is kind of the classic boutique thing. Sell your boutique in 10 to 15 years. Very powerful. All that very niche-y and that sort of stuff. Okay, so, and that's also a classic. So there's, for all the lifestyle companies out there, people kind of trapped in that world. That's a label. It sounds pejorative, but it does describe a type of firms in that situation. If you want to break out of that, the answer is to go. You're probably not going to scale up to the revenue model. At that point, you need to think about being this, going for intellectual property, doing the boutique thing. So that's the two that people really understand. Pariveda is a different animal. I think we're our own class, which is one that's around assets, right? So grow assets. All right. In professional services, I think in every company, but certainly in professional services, the one and only asset is your talent asset. So you focus on, you build your business model around growing talent, developing people. That sounds a lot like my 3 rules I was given earlier. Yeah, sure does. and pretty much everything, all my answers today, lean into that thinking. But that is if you think about it, that's a way to grow revenue, and it's a way to grow margin. When you have the best talent, you can charge a lot for it, and everybody wants it, right? So you get the margin and you get the revenue, but you're not going to be $50-70 billion company, right? You're going to be billion to 5 billion. Now, we're rounding error on that today, but I mean, there's plenty of headroom in our model to be, extremely, extremely large, because basically you're constrained by your ability to find the talent, and it takes time to develop the talent. And so those are the constraints that kind of trap, you're just going to be a tenth the size of what someone who goes the revenue route, but you're going to be 100 times, maybe 1,000 times what one could do in the optimal boutique world, right? So it's kind of the scaling things of the 3 different kinds. So hopefully that helps.
And I'm ready to move on to these rapid fire questions if you are.
Sure. I'm here
Awesome.
All right.
Okay.
Actually, you're serving. I'm just volleying them back, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. So for these, we try to keep answers less than 30 seconds if we can. You've given these great, super detailed explanations of all these questions, but these ones,
all right,
as fast as. Okay. The first one is, how much sleep do you get?
About 6 hours a night.
What's your favorite book and why? I know you have like thousands of books behind you, but if you were to pick one, what would it be and why?
Oh, wow. Now, business or any book or a business book?
Any book.
Any book. Oh, my. Okay, so this is obscure. Louis L'Amour, Western writer.
Okay.
He's written 100, right? Flint.
Okay.
I'll give you one of it just because it's just like, oh my gosh. I will tell you that I've read, this is a more than 30-second answer, I've read Pride and Prejudice 13 times. Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice. Why is that? I read it a couple of times and it was fabulous. And then I learned that Benjamin Disraeli, the very famous prime minister of the UK, on his deathbed was interviewed by a reporter from the London Times. And they, of course, asked him, what do you regret, right, that you're not going to be able to do? And he said, I've only read Pride and Prejudice 12 times. I wish I had time to read it again. And so I said, as soon as I read it, I was like, by gum, I'm going to read it at least 13 times. I do not want to have that regret.
I like that.
That's amazing. The third question is, if you had to start your career over again tomorrow with absolutely nothing, what's the first thing you would do?
And you're talking about my career, my current state, or my career if I was like going back and I was, 24 again or something?
Let's go with 24 again.
Yeah, only what I know, but go back to 24. I would start a hedge fund. I would just say, get it. Let's just go for the gusto. Let's start a hedge fund.
Okay.
Reporting.
Okay. So the next question we have is, what's most important to you in life?
Death with honor. Which means if I'm able to process that I'm dying, that I can look back and say, I've lived a life of honor. It's not been perfect, but basically done the honorable thing, as much as one could. It's literally it.
If you could change anything about the world, what would it be and why?
It could be a long list. Probably peace.
Make everybody
Like,
stop hating each other.
People no longer hate or fear each other. Yeah, that kind of peace. Yeah.
That's what Stan Lee wanted to change about the world too.
Oh, good to know.
Choice.
Here's the last question we have. How do you want to be remembered?
Wow. You talking about like a business person? Or
I generally think of it as like, how do you want your family to remember you? But you can interpret it in a different way if you want.
Well, I mean, I hope that the kids, and we got a couple of grandkids so far. I hope they say Gramps, Dad, and Gramps. He was a good man. He was a good dad. All that kind of stuff. That's from the personal side. I'm relying on my wife to appreciate me. After 42 years, it's too late to get out of that commitment.
What about coworkers? How do you want them to remember you?
Coworkers? As a good leader. Yeah.
Okay.
As a good leader. Honorable leader. The honorable leader. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that seems to be sort of a central theme of your story, is all surrounding yourself with fantastic people who've helped you accomplish amazing things. And I think that's a fantastic place to leave off with this episode, with that strong message about the importance of people. And so to all the people still listening, thank you so much for making it this way throughout the entire episode. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe on it to check out, to help the algorithm show our videos more often. And we'll be sure to link to everything Bruce and his company is doing. If you run a company and want his services, we'll be sure to make sure you know where to find him. And we'll see you next week, Tuesday at noon. Don't be late, and we'll see you there. Okay.
Well, thank you so much, Gavin and BJ.
Thank you.
Yeah,